Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for her wise words and support of this very important legislation. There have been many seminal moments, historical moments in our short history of our democracy and federation, and there are moments that we just reflect on it and go, look, where was I when? Where was I when there was the moon landing? Is something you often hear people chat about. Where was I when Cathy Freeman won gold in the 400 metres? Where was I on the date of the dismissal? And now, in 2023, we reflect, where was I when I found out the former Prime Minister and member for Cook swore himself into 5 secret ministries? Where was I when I found out about the deep betrayal of our former Prime Minister? And as I was writing this speech, Deputy Speaker, I thought I would take myself back to that time and just think about everyone's shock and disbelief at reading this news. I remember the day in August last year, my phone was going off, messages from everywhere, and I recall one I sent to my partner Joe, which was just a link to the breaking news, and all I typed was, OMG, WTF. It was a truly extraordinary moment. OMG, WTF indeed. And as we speak on this legislation, I thought it would be useful to understand the history of this extraordinary moment. We need to remember and refresh our memories about this absolute betrayal by the member for Cook of parliamentary process and of our democracy. He further severed the trust that he held with the Australian people, and here's how it played out. In August last year, the current Prime Minister confirmed that between March 2020 and May 2021, the member for Cook appointed himself to Minister for the Department of Health on the 14th of March 2020, Minister of Finance on March 30, 2020, Minister for Industry, Science, Energy and Resources on April the 15th, 2021, Minister for Home Affairs on May the 6th, 2021, and the Treasurer on May 6, 2021. And this revelation came just hours after the member for Cook then said that he didn't recall whether he had been sworn into appointments other than Health, Finance and Ministry. I mean, imagine that. Imagine not recalling whether you were appointed a minister. Imagine that. And he went on the radio nationwide and just said, oh yeah, I don't recall being appointed. Extraordinary. Anyway, let's go through each one because it's important. As we try and fix the mistakes of the past, it's important we understand what happened and when happened. So March 14, 2020. The member for Cook appointed himself to the Department of Health as Minister for Health. At the time, Australia had recorded just 100 cases of COVID. 5 days later, Australia would close its borders to international travellers, and returning Australians would thereafter be ordered into hotel quarantine. In what we learned to be a rare exception, the member for Cook had the support of the then Health Minister, Greg Hunt, to appoint himself to the portfolio. We know that that's an exception to the other portfolios he appointed himself to. It's believed that it had been discussed with other members of the National Security Cabinet, and we learned also that the reasoning for it was a safeguard mechanism should Mr Hunt become ill or infected. Look, this one's kind of half understandable, totally not necessary, because we know that current processes mean if a minister is unavailable, we can appoint a new one quite quickly, so not needed, but sure. A few people talked about it, it seemed okay, those in the know knew. But what's not understandable and what's not okay is that the public nor the parliament were not informed of the member for Cook's secret appointment. That's not okay, and that didn't happen. Then, on the 30th of March, the member for Cook then appointed himself to the finance portfolio. On that same day, he announced the JobKeeper scheme, which provided a $1,500 fortnightly payment to about 6 million Australians. The member for Cook said of this appointment, he said that last year, he said the situation was unprecedented and extraordinary, and that He needed a backup plan. Well, I'll tell you what was unprecedented and extraordinary. The fact that the then Finance Minister, the real one, not the substitute, the real Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, did not know that the member for Cook appointed himself to the finance portfolio, and once again, the public and the parliament were not informed. Interestingly, the member for Cook said at the time that not informing the real Minister for Finance that he appointed himself to the same portfolio had been an oversight of his office. Not an oversight of his office. There's always someone else to blame for the member for Cook. Nothing's his fault. And also, no apology to the parliament, no apology to the Australian people for not informing us. It was just an oversight of his office not to inform the actual Finance Minister. On April 15th, 2021, over a year later, the member for Cook appointed himself to the portfolio of Industry, Science and Resources. The member for Hinkler, who was the Resources Minister at the time, said he had a conversation at the time with the member for Cook, but neither of them made those conversations public. Again, the parliament, all the public, were not informed that the member for Cook also acted in that portfolio. And we now know, as the member for Dunkley just outlined, the absolute mess that has left communities up and down the New South Wales coast through that court case, something that has had real consequences by these terrible, terrible, terrible decisions of the member for Cook. And again, the public or the parliament were not made aware. On the 6th of May, the member for Cook appointed, he thought he was starting to get used to the process. Instead of appointing himself to one extra portfolio on one day, he appointed himself to 2 extra portfolios on one day. He appointed himself as Treasurer and the Minister for Home Affairs. He's getting more efficient the more he does it, you see, but didn't tell the public, didn't tell the parliament, didn't tell the Treasurer, didn't tell the member for Macpherson that he appointed himself to these portfolios. There's no doubt that the actions of the member for Cook were unprecedented and extraordinary. It's now a responsibility of this government that was elected on a platform of integrity to fix this issue and ensure that it never occurs again. The Australian people elected us to restore and rebuild trust in this place and in politics generally. And that's why this Ministers of State Amendment Bill is so important. This bill will ensure that the Australian people have transparency and accountability in their government. They will never have to find out that such a terrible misuse of office has occurred, and that they will be able to access such information related to the composition of the federal executive, those appointed to administer certain departments of state, and the hires offices that ministers of state hold. What the former Prime Minister did isn't just unconventional, it isn't just unorthodox, it is and was a violation of the conventions of this place, and it is indefensible. As we learnt from those within his own party, some of who are still here today, but senior members of his own party who also thought these actions were indefensible. The former member of my own seat in Bennelong, former Prime Minister John Howard, stated that he didn't think the member for Cook should have done what he did, that there was no need to do it, and that he would never, of course he would never have done it. No, there's no one in the history of this place that would ever think to do this, other than someone of the calibre of the member for Cook. Former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull said, and I quote, "This is sinister stuff. This is secret government. This is one of the most appalling things I've ever heard in our federal government. I mean, the idea that a Prime Minister would be sworn into other ministries secretly is incredible." Upon finding out that the former Prime Minister had sworn himself into her portfolio, the member for Macpherson told the media, quote, "This is totally unacceptable. For a Prime Minister to behave in this manner undermines everything that a federal government constitutionally should stand for." She would then ask him to resign and to leave Parliament, something I note he has yet to do. This government needs to ensure that what the member for Cook did can never happen again as we embark on what the Australian people elected us to do, and that is to rebuild the trust of Australian people in government. We now come to what the member for Cook had to say for himself. Let's have no doubt about, he said that this was trying to improve efficiency of government, but this was nothing more than the member for Cook trying to accumulate more power for himself. In the mind of the member for Cook, he did nothing wrong in awarding himself these 5 secret ministries. He believes he was justified in his behaviour, and he's made that clear in his inconsistent comments and answers. And we all sat here listening to the member for Cook's defence during the censure motion, and he still doesn't get it. Still doesn't get it. He tried to justify his actions under the guise of the unprecedented circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, if this were to be believed, that might explain being sworn into the first 2 of his secret ministries. Doesn't explain why no one was told, but it might explain that. But then why did he appoint himself to 3 other ministries over a year later? So that reason doesn't stack up, and the inconsistencies continue. He said that he had trust in his former ministers and that he trusted them to exercise the powers of their portfolio. But he only took on portfolios in which those same ministers had unilateral power to make decisions without cabinet. They're the ones that the member for Cook appointed himself to. And they continue again. He said that the suggestions of co-administrations of departments is 100% false. Why then does official documentation show that the member for Cook was appointed to administer the departments of Home Affairs and Treasury? This is the same man, the member for Cook, who stood in front of a Perth audience last year and said that we shouldn't trust governments. I don't think we should have trusted his government, and this government is set to restore some of that trust that the member for Cook's government eroded. Does the opposition take this matter seriously? During the censure motion, they voted against it, which is something I found incredibly surprising. But even more galling was the line of members of the opposition going to congratulate Mr Morrison for that half-an-hour defence of these indefensible actions. I found that extraordinary. With the exception of 1 or 2 members of the opposition, they stood by what the member for Cook did and then congratulated him after his speech. I have some advice for those opposite. Keeping those in this place accountable for their actions is not a witch hunt. Establishing trust in our great democratic system is not a witch hunt. The people of Australia made their decision loudly and clearly in May as to who they trusted in government to restore integrity, and it wasn't the opposition, and for good reason. This legislation is just one part of the Albanese government's commitment to responding to Justice Bell's inquiry into the appointment of the former Prime Minister to administer multiple departments. This legislation is just one part of our commitment to the Australian people to safeguard our democracy and to ensure that the people of Australia can stand proud in their trust of this place. We understand that democracy is precious, and we understand that when it's challenged, as it was by the member for Cook, that it needs to be defended. We know that we must restore trust and integrity to politics, and this bill, in the timely manner in which it's come to this place, shows our commitment to achieving just that. This bill, if passed through this place, will ensure that never again will one person be able to hold such extraordinary ministerial power without accountability to the Australian people and to this parliament. I commend the bill.